I'm not sure about you, but the church I grew up in had all sorts of messages that were heard overtly and very clearly, and some other messages that were intimated. And one of the clear messages I heard in both respects was that doubt is the enemy of faith. Or more palatable, doubt is the opposite of faith. That's what I was led to believe growing up. It seems that for some of us, no matter how much faith we have, and no matter, and I find this phrase deplorable, no matter how strong of a Christian you are, if there is any question, if there is any shred, if there's any inkling of a question, if there's any doubt, something is wrong. The intimation in the overt statements where if you doubt, not only is something wrong, you are wrong. Isn't that the way we have grown up and heard about faith? It tends to be either or, that you either have faith or you have doubt. There is no middle room. Truisms seem to be like that. All of you are familiar with truisms, aren't you? Try this one on. I think all of you will get this truism because of where we live. The government is to blame for everything. Or the greedy capitalist are all at fault. We tend to rely on truisms, but they don't allow for the complicated reality that's called life. One of my favorite truisms of all time, and I say this rather facetiously, one of my favorite truisms comes from that great theological library we call country music. If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. What utter nonsense. It's a horrible way to think. If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Not only is it false, it's bad theology. Yet, I think we are tempted to believe it. Any doubt, we think, that erases a question, we might be tempted to believe erases the larger fabric of our faith and the larger fabric of our life. And so we're led to believe that when it comes to church, religion, God, that we have to score 100 on the Bible exam or score 100 on the life exam. And so if there is that one bit, if we score a 99, then somehow we are not exactly faithful. And so, sadly, quite sadly, many churches, the church, has told people that if you doubt, we doubt you. How utterly sad and awful. And so this Sunday, Thomas takes the rap for us, for all of us who have questions and doubts and wondering why in the world we're here on a Sunday morning. Thomas takes the rap for us. Poor Thomas, because his reputation is really revolves around this day. Doubting Thomas is how we know Thomas. And so for those of you who are named Thomas, you probably have grown up with that. What we don't hear much in the church is that at one point, when Jesus said to his disciples, "I'm going up to Jerusalem to die," it was Thomas who was the first one to raise his hand and say, "We're going with you." We conveniently forget that about Thomas. And so we're left here on this Sunday after Easter, also known as Low Sunday, because this is the Sunday typically in churches all across this country where you get the least attendance. because we, including clergy, have spent so much time during Holy Week. The choir has spent so much time during Holy Week. And on Easter Day, that afternoon, we are just tired. And the prospect of coming back the next Sunday and doing it all again is just a daunting prospect. And so even clergy get tired. So typically the way this works in the preaching rotation is the rector pawns off to the associate or to the seminary intern to preach on this day. And usually the rector, the senior minister, takes this Sunday off. I don't take this Sunday off because I think this might be actually the real Sunday, the Sunday where we are church. We marked and celebrated and observed a wonderful Holy Week and Easter, but I dare say that this is the representative Sunday, that you come here with all sorts of questions. Next week, we'll come back and do it all again. The week after that, we'll do it all again. That's what I think it means in part to be church, that we come together as a community of faith, and we meet weekly, and we bring all of our questions, our concerns, our joys. We bring all of that together, and we'll do it again next week and the week after. Poor Thomas takes the rap for all of us. And the strange thing, the funny thing about this reading is that when Jesus appears to his disciples the first time, Thomas is not there. We don't know why Thomas is absent. I would suspect that if Thomas were like me, he may have been looking out for himself and may have been on the run. Because after all, their friend and teacher, the one they had pledged to follow, has been executed. He's dead. If it were me, I would be looking out for myself. I would be avoiding any cop that I could. And so maybe Thomas is doing that. We don't know. Maybe Thomas is out picking up dinner for everyone. We're not quite sure. But then a second time, Jesus appears, and Thomas is there. And Thomas and Jesus get into this particular exchange where Jesus says, Thomas, put your hands on me, touch, body and blood, touch body and blood if you need to touch that. I suspect we are all like Thomas. I am. We've promised and pledged our life to follow this teacher from Nazareth so much that we want as much information as we can get. Jesus, what happened to you? How are you here? What's going on? You've just been executed. Please tell us what's going on. We crave information, don't we? We want to know as much as we can, whether that is a loved one, a spouse, a lover, a friend, a parent, or someone we just became infatuated with. We crave to know as much as we can. We crave to put our hand on them. What we do today is we Google and Wikipedia to get that information. Sad, this is another sermon, but sad that those two words are now verbs in our language. But we Google and Wikipedia when we want information. We want to touch, we crave, we want to know everything. We have questions. Last night at our contemporary service, at this point in the sermon, I mentioned that, what we do is we Google. And I said, when you go home tonight, this is the operative phrase, I said, when you go home tonight, Google, where is Jesus? It occurred to me in the middle of the sermon last night. I've never done it, but it occurred to me there were 3 people in the service who got on their phone during the sermon. Please don't do that here now. But I think Thomas is us. Thomas is you and me, desperately trying to get it right, desperately trying to know, desperately trying for things to make sense, to see his Lord. And so in the midst of joy, in the midst of life, in the midst of everything that's going on, confusion, pain, joy, how do you make sense of all this that's going on? And the writer of Luke puts this whole event, in my opinion, in a much better way. I like how the writer of Luke describes all of this. He says about the disciples, in their joy, they disbelieved and wondered. In their joy, they disbelieved and wondered. I can think of no better description of what it means to be a Christian and to grieve the loss of your teacher and your Lord, or your spouse, or lover, parent, or friend. That somehow in what we call life, in what brings us great joy and laughter, we also grieve and are sad. And we have a lot of questions. In that confluence, the writer of Luke says, in their joy, they disbelieved and wondered. The one you love is no longer here. You can't touch them. You can't see them. And yet you desperately want to. Thomas wants to. And so what's wrong with that? Why do we make fun of Thomas? He desperately, like us, wants to see and touch his Lord. He wants to be with this one he had pledged his life to follow. I think Thomas is like you, and Thomas is like me. And in that moment, in that confluence of all those emotions and questions, Jesus appears, and he says to all the disciples in a room, he says, "Peace be with you. Peace be with you." Come on. The teacher they had pledged to follow has just been executed. They were known for following him, so their lives were probably on the line. And this is what you get: peace. Peace be with you. That sounds rather soft and wimpy. And it sounds like something we ascribe to be church chat and preacher talk. Peace, that sounds real church-like. But out in the real world, out there, beyond the windows and this wall, out there, we really need something tough and with teeth. Something that's strong. That's what's real. This whole business about peace sounds nice for the church. I would like to remind you that on the night in which Jesus was betrayed, on that very night, he was huddled in a room with his closest friends. There was no army to protect them. There was nothing save for the presence of God in both body and blood. The disciples and Jesus huddled together against the world, or better yet, for the world. And all they had was their faith in this teacher, and that faith was disappearing quickly. That faith was circling the drain. May I also remind you that on the night the disciples were in that locked room, huddled next to each other and afraid. There was no vestry. There was no strategic plan. There was no diocesan mission statement. There were no church activities. There was no pulpit. A group of disciples huddled together. And all they had going for them was somehow the presence of God showed up in the midst of them. That's all they had going for them, that God somehow, in body and blood, showed up in the midst of them. And maybe that's as close as we ever get to being church. Despite our vestry, despite our strategic plan, despite our diocesan mission statement, despite all of our activities, it's a risen Lord who breaks into closed doors, literally closed doors, and appears among us. Maybe that's as close as we ever get to being church. In just a moment, Father Sandy will say to all of you, the peace of the Lord be with you. And when he says that, when the priest says that to you, that's not meant to make nice and to be pleasant. That's not why we do that. We do that as a confession. We confess that in the midst of our life, in the midst of our joy, in the midst of everything that's going well, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our confusion, in the midst of all of our questions, we are made people of God, not because you have a rector. You're not made the people of God because we have a church building. You're not made the people of God because you have a vestry or a strategic plan. You are made the people of God by the presence and Spirit of God. I am here. Touch my body. Touch my blood, body and blood. I think that's all we really need. Peace be with you.